All right, Alexander, let's talk about the big meeting in Uzbekistan, the SCO summit. All the big players were there. Putin, Xi Jinping, Modi, Erdogan. Erdogan was there. Who else? What other countries? Kazakhstan was represented. Iran. There was actually a border flare-up going on between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan today. Just on a side note, since we're talking about the SCO and we're looking at Eurasia, you also have the flare-up in Armenia and Azerbaijan. I'm starting to think maybe this is the U.S. trying to bust up the SCO summit, kind of rain on their parade, I guess. But a lot of big deals being signed, a lot of big movements being made, but I guess it can all be summarized in one very long word, and that is de-dollarization.
Exactly.
Because that is the word that would describe everything that is going on.
That is exactly correct. I mean, put aside the military aspects of this, which are there. This is the creation of an integrated economic system operating outside the dollar. So we're going to see major pipeline deals between China and Russia, major trade agreements, but they're all going to be moving away from the dollar. The trade is going to be conducted in rubles and yuan, RMB, and other countries are following in their wake. And they're all looking very pleased with themselves. There's an extraordinary photograph. I don't know whether you've seen it, but, you know, there's a whole group of them, not Xi Jinping, interestingly, but a lot of the others are sitting around a table, you know, with all sorts of food there. And you have Erdogan, Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, Putin is there, and Lukashenko is there. And there's all this sort of people sort of hanging around, and they're all smiles, and they're all looking very happy and all very pleased. And you get the sense that, you know, they're moving forward in all the things that they're doing. Specific deals that are being done. Russia and Iran are apparently working on a treaty to create a strategic partnership. Now, that's big because, as we've seen, strategic partnerships are, to all intents and purposes, alliances. I mean, we don't use that word. They like to avoid using that word, but clearly that's on the cards between Iran and Russia. And there was a very interesting meeting between Putin and Raisi. There was an absolutely extraordinary meeting between Putin and the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Sharif. Now, remember, this current Prime Minister of Pakistan is supposed to be pro-American. I mean, he was brought in as a result of some kind of parliamentary coup, which ousted the previous Prime Minister, Imran Khan, who was being seen by many people as getting too close to the Russians. Well, this Prime Minister comes along to Putin, addresses Putin as Your Excellency. I can't imagine what Putin made of that. Says, you know, you're a superpower and we want gas pipelines. We want gas pipelines going to Pakistan. So, I mean, you know, so you can see that's also saying, you know, we did a preliminary deal. We were talking about this in 2016, 2017, but it wasn't really put together. Now let's get down and sort it out and build gas pipelines to Pakistan from Russia. Now, such a gas pipeline has to pass through Afghanistan, which means you bring in the Taliban in some form. If you're going to build a gas pipeline from Russia to Pakistan, well, why not go on and extend it to India as well? So you can see the kind of things that are going on. But the biggest deals, by far, are the ones between the Chinese and the Russians. They've apparently already hit their target of $200 billion annual trade turnover, which is big, by the way, by any standard. And apparently it's going to grow much more. There was mock-ups of the Chinese-Russian wide-bodied civilian jetliner, which they're working on together. And the other thing is, apparently, there's a major big commercial deal between Russia and India in the works, and Putin and Modi are going to be talking about that too. But you're absolutely right. The overall framework of all of this is you build an economic, financial structure outside the dollar. And the US is alert to this. They're trying to stop the Mir card, the Mir payment card, Russia's alternative to MasterCard and Visa. They're making threats to Turkey, to Turkish banks and Turkish retailers who use it, that they might be threatened by secondary sanctions. But, that extraordinary photograph, Erdogan talking to Putin over this table of food basically tells its story.
Yeah, well, then the collective West says this is not about punishing ordinary Russians. Well, going after the Mir card
What else is
internationally outside of Russia is about punishing ordinary Russians. You try to hamper their ability to make
travel.
Transactions outside of Russia using the Mir card.
Of course, that's exactly what it is.
And
that's exactly what it is. Prevent them going on holiday.
And then you have the
to
narrative. Yeah, exactly. Prevent them going on holiday. Exactly. That's what it's about. Visa and MasterCard must be worried about the competition, even though they try to say that they're not. They obviously are. What do you make about the narrative from the collective West, which is that Putin is in Uzbekistan in order to seek some sort of help from China because everything is collapsing around him, domestically as well as the conflict in Ukraine, and he's going to the Chinese, as they say in the collective West. I've read countless articles which say he's going to the Chinese emperor to seek assistance, because if he doesn't get China's assistance, well then the Russian Federation is doomed.
Now, there's a scintilla of evidence to support that. I mean, I've been reading all the readouts, all the things that the Chinese and the Russians have been saying about the meetings between Putin and Xi. From what I can see, it's all very friendly, all very amicable, and it simply builds on all the things that they have been talking about many times before. There's no evidence that the Russian economy is under any specific particular stress. Today, the Russian central bank again cut interest rates. Prices in Russia are falling. Inflation is falling and output is rising. The Russian central bank has produced a report this morning, which I was reading just before we did this program, which said that the central bank itself is surprised by the speed of recovery in business activity in Russia. So there's no sign there of any collapsing economy in Russia. Obviously, the Russians want to sell their gas and their oil, but then, of course, as they say, as the Russians themselves say, they want to sell their gas and oil, but that they are not finding any difficulty finding customers. And we saw the Prime Minister of Pakistan comes along and says, I want a pipeline, please. So there's no sign that the Russians are under that kind of stress. As for the military conflict, well, the Russians have never apparently asked the Chinese for military aid. I don't think they ever will. I think they have all the resources that they need to carry out this operation for themselves. They may need niche products from time to time, like drones, but apparently they've been able to buy them from Iran. So, this idea of a supplicant Putin going to the emperor is nonsense. And what it's clearly intended to do, I think, is both to denigrate Putin, to make him look weak, and also to create problems between China and Russia, to make Russians feel that Putin is, selling out to the Chinese in some way. By the way, the Chinese media is full of warnings about this, about the West trying to create a wedge between China and Russia again.
Well, I would say there's a third reason, actually, as well, which plays into this, and that is that the collective West is doing a disservice to its people. It's not telling their citizens the truth, which is that when you look at these countries, their populations, their geography, the size of these countries, if they're all going to be trading outside of the dollar, if you're a citizen of the United States, if you're a citizen of the EU, you got to think to yourself, well, what does this mean for me? Because we're talking about a significant chunk of the world, if not a majority of the world, which is going to now be transacting outside of the US dollar. And so the collective West, they're not letting their people know what's coming.
No, they're not.
They're not. They're crafting these ridiculous little scripts about Putin defeated and Xi coming to his aid, but they're not saying, look, a country of 1.5 billion, another country of 1.8 billion, a country of 300 million, a country of 150 million, and all of Eurasia and the Middle East and Asia, it's all going to be operating outside of our financial architecture.
No.
People need to know this.
You're completely correct. What they're trying to do, in effect, is they're trying to reduce the whole topic to a discussion about Xi and Putin coming, kowtowing to the Chinese emperor. I mean, and you're absolutely right. They don't want to talk about this. I read a Russian commentary, and I don't know that this is true, but I at the back of the envelope sort of way, I think it probably is true that the countries that attended this conference in Samarkand, their leaders, that these countries account for more than half of the world's population. More than half. And they account for, a huge proportion of its GDP, an enormous proportion of its manufacturing capacity. China is now, the biggest manufacturing economy. And as we've seen, a huge proportion of its food, commodities, oil, raw materials markets as well, producers as well. So you're absolutely right. I mean, if it all comes together, which all the indications are that it is, and at an accelerating speed, then the reality is that we will become the lesser economic zone, not the greater economic zone anymore. Far from being a globalized, unified economy run by people who are based in Brussels and Washington and London, it'll be a completely different economic structure dominated by people who speak other languages than English.
Well, if this comes together, you said, so what can the U.S. do to prevent this from coming together? And this organization, this initiative is very far along. I mean, it's it's there, it's here. The SCO, BRICS, all of it is here, and it's picking up a lot of momentum. So what does the United States do in order to prevent this de-dollarization, in order to prevent this from happening? Is it a full-out war in Ukraine? Is it a full-out war in Taiwan and China? What are there other things that they're going to try to do? I mean, escalate in smaller countries.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes. So
what can they do to prevent this? What are they going to do?
I mean, let's be very clear. I mean, we've now got to a position where this is evolving, and it's evolving in a way that is becoming antagonistic to the West, which it didn't need to be. I mean, some kind of integration of the Eurasian economies was always likely, but it didn't need to take this form. And I think that's something we need to say. But now that it's happening in this form, what cards does the US and the West have to play? Firstly, they will try to involve these countries in conflicts. Russia and Ukraine, as we've seen, they will try to stir up conflicts in all sorts of places in Central Asia, perhaps in the Caucasus, very likely over Taiwan as well, try and create strains between these countries. The other thing is they will also try to encourage color revolutions within them, the democracies versus autocracies narrative. So they will use all that machinery of color revolution. And interestingly enough, Xi Jinping has been going around warning everybody about this, says that what we're going to be seeing over the next few years is an intensification of color revolution attempts in all of these various countries that are involved here. And as we've discussed, one of the main purposes of the Ukraine war was to undermine Russia's economy. In fact, not just to undermine it, the French finance minister openly talked about destroying it in order to engineer the overthrow of Putin, which is something that Biden essentially called for, with the expectation that whoever succeeds Putin, President Navalny perhaps, will break this connection with the Chinese and with the Eurasians. So that's what they're going to try to do. And we'll see whether they succeed. I mean, you know, it's, again, a very destructive policy, a very misguided one, in my opinion, one that is more likely to solidify this grouping. But arguably, it's all they have left.
Well, take a look at all the conflicts and regime changes, the regime change attempts that have taken place in the last year and a half. Belarus, Kazakhstan, constant fighting between Armenia, Azerbaijan. Now Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Ukraine, Russia, Taiwan, China. I mean, all of this stuff that has taken place is going to probably accelerate. Everyone needs to be on notice. John Bolton has an entire NGO dedicated to overthrowing Erdogan. I mean, an entire NGO dedicated to regime change in Turkey. I mean, every leader that was at attendance at this summit should be aware of what's about to come.
Absolutely. I'm sure they are. I mean, as I said, Xi Jinping is going around warning them all that this is indeed what's coming. So I agree. We are going to see an awful lot more of this. Sorry?
That's another one,
yeah. So we're going to
Pakistan as well.
Pakistan
Yeah,
as well.
Khan,
Exactly.
You mentioned that.
Exactly. So we're going to see a lot more of this over the next few years, until this thing becomes irreversible, until it congeals and hardens into something that can't be changed. If it does, if it gets there. In other words, and we have to say this and be straightforward about this, the world is going to become a lot more interesting and a lot more unstable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the Thucydides Trap, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The hegemon is not going to go out quietly. They're not going to go down quietly.
No.
That's for sure.
Not this one. Absolutely not. No.
All right. We'll leave it there. TheDuran.locals.com and go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.